On July 7th, 2005, London woke up to a morning that felt like a victory. The city had just celebrated winning the Olympic bid.
The International Olympic Committee has the honour of announcing that the Games of the 30th Olympiad in 2012 are awarded to the city of London.
And millions of commuters were pouring into the underground with a sense of optimism. But moving quietly among them were 4 young men who didn't look like soldiers or foreign agents. They were homegrown citizens carrying backpacks and a plan that would shatter the capital's peace in less than 60 minutes. They weren't just attacking a transport network.
By the 2005 London bombings was shown in public for the first time today at the inquest into the deaths of 52 people.
They were targeting the very idea of safety in a modern city. In this video, we are reconstructing the timeline of the 7/7 bombings, the day the underground became a war zone and London was forced to stop. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into what really happened that day. Long before the first sign of chaos, the day had already begun in silence. At around 04 Vuldrol in the morning, 3 men left Leeds and began their journey toward London. They drove south, stopping briefly along the way before reaching Luton. There, they met a 4th man. Nothing about them stood out. No panic, no urgency, just 4 individuals moving through an ordinary morning. By 0740, they boarded a Thameslink train heading into the city. Around 0823, they arrived at King's Cross station, one of the busiest transport hubs in London. CCTV cameras later showed them walking calmly through the station, blending in with hundreds of commuters. At one point, they paused together, then separated, each heading in a different direction. There were no alarms, no warnings, just routine movement inside a crowded system. What made it more unsettling was how normal everything looked. These were not people acting out of place. They carried backpacks, walked with purpose, and disappeared into the flow of the morning rush without drawing attention. Within minutes, each of them had stepped onto different underground trains. And then, in less than a minute, London's routine was completely shattered. At 8:49 in the morning, everything changed in an instant. Within just 50 seconds, 3 explosions hit London's underground network almost back to back. It wasn't spread out over time. It was fast, coordinated, and deeply confusing. The first blast struck a Circle Line train travelling between Liverpool Street and Aldgate.
Reports of an explosion outside Liverpool Street Station, that of course in the East End of London.
Almost immediately after, a second explosion hit another Circle Line train near Edgware Road, damaging not just one train, but also affecting a passing one beside it. Then came the third on the Piccadilly line, just after leaving King's Cross toward Russell Square. That explosion tore through a packed carriage deep underground, where space was tight and escape was limited. In those first moments, no one understood what was happening. Early reports suggested electrical faults or power surges. Some believed there had been derailments. The system itself struggled to make sense of it. By 9:19 a.m, a code amber alert was declared and trains were ordered to stop at the next station and evacuate passengers. But this wasn't a system failure. This was something far more deliberate. And while the underground was already in chaos, one final moment was still approaching above ground. Deep beneath the streets, the most devastating moment unfolded on the Piccadilly line. Just after leaving King's Cross, a packed train heading toward Russell Square was hit by the third explosion. This section of the underground ran through a deep level tunnel around 30 metres below the surface with a narrow space and limited airflow. When the blast went off, the force had nowhere to escape. It stayed inside, intensifying the damage in a way the earlier explosions did not. The explosion struck near the front of the train, tearing through the carriage and damaging the one behind it. In that confined space, passengers were thrown, injured, and trapped in darkness. One survivor described it as an extremely loud pop and a very bright yellow light, followed by what felt like complete chaos. Another recalled complete and utter pandemonium as people tried to understand what had just happened. This single attack became the deadliest of the day, claiming 26 lives in that one tunnel alone. In the darkness, people helped each other, using whatever they had to stop bleeding and stay alive. And just when it seemed like the worst had already happened, another explosion struck above ground. Nearly an hour after the underground explosions, many believed the worst was already over. But at 9:47 a.m, a fourth explosion hit above ground, changing everything again. A number 30 double-decker bus was travelling through Tavistock Square, carrying passengers who had already been forced off the tube due to earlier disruptions. The blast tore through the top deck, ripping off the roof and destroying the rear section of the bus. The force of the explosion sent debris into the street, damaging nearby buildings. Witnesses described seeing papers and half a bus flying through the air. The front of the vehicle remained mostly intact, but those seated toward the back suffered the most severe impact. The location of the explosion played a critical role in what followed. It happened near the headquarters of the British Medical Association, where doctors and medical staff rushed out immediately to help. With limited equipment, they used whatever they had to treat the injured right there on the street. This final attack claimed 13 lives. By now, it was clear this was not a single incident. It was something much bigger. And as the city tried to process what had happened, attention turned to the people behind it. As the scale of the attacks became clear, the focus shifted to one question: who carried this out? Soon, 4 individuals were identified. They were young men, aged 18 to 30, and at first glance, nothing about them matched what people expected. They lived ordinary lives, had families, and moved through their communities without raising major concern. 3 of them were British-born sons of Pakistani immigrants, while the 4th had converted to Islam. They came from places like Leeds and Aylesbury, not from distant conflict zones. One worked as a learning mentor at a primary school, another helped at his family's business. Their backgrounds made the situation even more difficult to understand. They were later described as cleanskins, meaning they were not previously known to authorities. There were no major warning signs that placed them on a high risk list before that day. Each had a specific role. One led the group and carried out the second train attack. Another was responsible for the most deadly explosion underground. The youngest carried out the final attack on the bus. What made this even more unsettling was how normal they had appeared just hours earlier. But their everyday lives didn't explain how they reached this point. That story went much deeper. The shift from ordinary life to planning something this serious did not happen overnight. In the months leading up to the attacks, there were clear steps that showed preparation. From around March 2005, materials were being collected to build improvised explosive devices. These were not military-grade items, but homemade mixtures using concentrated hydrogen peroxide packed into backpacks. A key location tied to this preparation was a flat in Leeds, where traces of explosive materials were later found. This space became central to assembling the devices. There was also a practice run. About a week before the attacks, the group travelled into London, moving through stations like King's Cross to observe routes and timing. It looked like a normal trip, but it served a very specific purpose. After the attacks, recorded videos began to surface, revealing how the individuals involved saw their actions. These were not random acts in their eyes. They described themselves using words like soldiers and framed what they had done as part of a larger conflict. Their statements focused heavily on global events and political decisions. One of them said, "We are at war, and I am a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation." Another message warned that what had happened was only the beginning of a string of attacks that will continue and become stronger. Their words pointed to anger over conflicts in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and they claimed their actions were a response to those situations. They also referenced support for other countries as a reason for targeting civilians, presenting it as a form of retaliation. What stood out was how clearly they believed in what they were saying. There was no sign of hesitation in their tone. They had already justified everything in their own minds before that day. But while their message spread across the world, the reality on the ground in London was still unfolding. And the impact of that day didn't end with the attacks. It changed the city in ways that lasted for years. By mid-morning, London had come to a near standstill. The entire underground network was shut down, buses in central areas were suspended, and thousands of people were left with no way to get home except by walking. Streets filled with crowds moving in silence, trying to process what had just happened. Communication systems also struggled. Around 10:00 a.m, mobile networks reached capacity, making it difficult for people to contact family or emergency services. This added to the confusion, as many were unsure who was safe and who wasn't. Emergency teams responded across multiple locations at once. Ambulances, fire crews, and volunteers worked side by side, treating injuries and evacuating survivors. Some stations were turned into temporary medical areas to handle the number of people needing help. By the end of the day, the full scale became clear. A total of 52 people were killed and around 700 others were injured. It was the deadliest attack in the United Kingdom since 1988. Beyond the numbers, the impact went deeper. Fear, uncertainty, and tension spread across communities, and daily life no longer felt the same. In the end, the smoke eventually cleared from the tunnels, but the questions left by the 7/7 attacks still hang over the city. 52 innocent people lost their lives in a tragedy that redefined the British understanding of terrorism. It wasn't an external enemy that brought London to a standstill, but 4 clean skins, men entirely unknown to the security services who had built their bombs in a quiet flat in Leeds. The inquiry that followed exposed uncomfortable gaps in intelligence and forced a nation to look inward at how radicalisation takes root at home. London survivors proved their resilience, getting back on the trains the very next day, but the memory of that morning remains a permanent scar on the capital's history. Do you remember where you were when the news of 7/7 broke? Share your story in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe for more real crime stories. Stay safe.